For the questions, I think for me it was about, the inspirations were like the relationship between the two of them. Obviously it's a comedy, it's played very light, so there's a kind of style that we expect with that. And I think also for me, the idea of what it feels like to be trapped with someone in a space. I think generally we all have a pretty good understanding after COVID of exactly what that feels like to be kind of confined and contained and isolated in a space. So I think for me, the idea of evoking that kind of feeling in a space, or making it feel like, generally the idea was creating the sense of an island in the space. So the idea that everything is kind of floating and separated. And so that's how we kind of came up with the general idea, or the general kind of shape of the space. It's designing in theatre is so much a collaborative process, and it's almost kind of impossible to do it alone or isolated. So in this instance particularly, it was a lot of conversations with Mitchell about what was necessary. There's a lot of actual fine natural detail in the book as well. There's a lot of small kind of proppy moments and that kind of stuff that were a fairly big consideration in knowing practically what we need in terms of the working kitchen and the living space. And Mitchell is very specific about exactly what he kind of requires in terms of what he uses in the space to make the acting and the blocking as powerful as it can be. So often it's a very long conversation with Mitchell about exactly what he feels would work best for the scenes. I think for me, it kind of goes back to what I was saying a little bit about the idea of confinement and isolation. I think the comedy in this comes from the fact that they are trapped together. It's almost like, who would you not want to be with on a deserted island? I think that's kind of the feeling. So I think the more that they can kind of feel separated from the environment, or the more that they feel super like trapped in that space, I think the better. I think that really amplifies the kind of comedy that is in the book, which Dan has written and is hilarious. You really couldn't get two more separate people, and so I love that I love that we can kind of amplify that with the shape of the space. Costume-wise, it's also about kind of creating that character separation between, Van's written in a lot of beautiful detail for each of the characters as well. Our resident is he defines himself as serene neutral, which is a great descriptor, and that was very useful in kind of creating the idea of the look of the character is. The resident is very beige, shall we say. So the interior of the apartment matches his costume, which is kind of quite beige and neutral. And then with the visitor, we have this amazing kind of opportunity to pump a bunch of colour. So we get this sense that the outside world is much more colourful than the world of the resident. And so when the visitor kind of enters that space, she's this kind of great pop of colour. And we also get that kind of variance between someone being kind of beige and neutral, and then this kind of bright colour, which just kind of, and then eventually over the course of the play, the colour spreads, let's say. The band was definitely a very important early consideration for us for this one, and for Mitchell and myself, it was always the idea that they would be visible, and written into the script is the idea that they are in a separate building. Obviously the space is quite tight in terms of a venue, so how do you do this kind of view into two different buildings? And the way that we've kind of done that is make the main kind of stage space the main apartment, and then beyond that we kind of see the idea of buildings beyond it, and part of that is the band. So we've kind of created this little pop-out kind of feature, which is essentially where this big skyline backdrop kind of becomes 3D at one point, and in that lives the band. Yeah, they're very much part of the musical rather than often being in the pit or being, up the back somewhere. They're very visible, which we love. I think it's great to honour that for musicians who sometimes, aren't so visible.